Madam Chairman, I have a point of inquiry before I begin my questions, if I may. And it's a serious, I'm asking for information. In Chairman DeFazio's opening statement, I just need to clarify, did he say that he had a conversation with a former GSA employee who gave him a different perspective on the lease arrangement?
Oh, I said my staff did.
Your staff did. Did that individual provide, Madam Chairman, did that individual provide documentation either in printed or electronic format, or was the content of the conversation recorded?
May I respond to the gentleman? The former ranking staff who has jurisdiction over this issue met with a person from GSA, and that person said there were substantial issues to be resolved. That conversation was characterized and sent to GSA in a letter of inquiry in November, and GSA said that's not the conversation, and they denied the whole thing. So that's the end of that, and that gentleman has been transferred to New York, and he won't talk to anybody.
Okay, but it was a former
He's been transferred to New York, the GSA employee.
Madam Chairman, my inquiry is, was that a former member of this committee staff that had that conversation? And if it was documented in any form, then it should have been provided to the entire committee, the staff were identified and the individual identified. That would be my point of inquiry.
I have no idea what he's talking about.
We'll just take a minute to take that under consideration.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I've been advised that it was an informal meeting to a former staffer. I'm sure those kind of meetings take place all the time. We can talk about that further offline.
I thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
It would be my opinion that that information should have been provided to the entire committee, but I really appreciate your response to the inquiry.
Okay, thank you. You would like
Point of order.
Mr. Meadows?
If indeed it is entered into the record, it has to have something that's documented. You can't have a referral to a testimony that is not something of record, according to the committee rules.
This was not a testimony. It was not referred to as a testimony. It was referred to as an informal conversation with a former staff person.
So, point of inquiry then, was it subject to your investigation? So you're saying this is not part of your normal investigation, this was just a casual conversation?
This was back in 2016, so we will move on with the questions from Mr. Palmer.
You mean under the previous Congress?
Yes.
So then it's not relevant to this hearing.
Well, it's as relevant as the pictures from the ribbon cutting are, so I think we'll now move on with Mr. Palmer's questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. IG Ochoa, is that correct?
Ochoa.
Ochoa, thank you. In your written testimony, you make a point in your conclusion that appears to say that the procedures that the GSA followed in these outleases of historic properties is consistent with the other outleases. And I'll read to you, it says, GSA OGC has acknowledged that if a constitutional violation were later found, they would have to revisit the issue of potential breach of the OPO leases interested parties provision. However, the fact remains that GSA continues to use the language of the provision and other outleases of historic properties. So it appears to me that they're basically doing what they always do. It's almost like a cut and paste and a lease arrangement that occurred apparently in 2013. Is that accurate?
Are you asking me about the origin of that language?
No, ma'am. I'm asking you if this is consistent with what, as you point out, and it appears that you think it's problematic, GSA has kind of a standard operating procedure for these out leases of historic properties.
The point of the sentence that you're reading to me was that GSA has told us that if there is a constitutional violation found, they would have to go back and revisit whether there was a breach
But the
of
point I'm
old post
making-
office lease. They still have the same language in 2 existing leases.
It's consistent with the other leases. It's the same language in these other out leases of historic properties.
Yeah, it's substantially similar. The only difference is which state and local officials it applies to.
That's my point. This is a standard lease. Madam Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to the ranking member, Mr. Meadows.